Welcome to the Leedz Edutainment Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with people in hip-hop culture, based out of New England. Leeds. All right. We're here.
Yes, we are.
How we doing? How we doing
I'm
today?
good, man. I'm good. Happy Friday. You know, all the good things.
Yeah, happy Friday. Friday can be different for many different people. Like for me, Friday is like middle of the work week. So it's like,
Yeah, I don't have days off anymore, but Friday's always a good thing to celebrate.
did you ever have days off?
Sometimes I guess it
Because
was a lot of
judging
work
by
these days.
judging by what you sent me, it doesn't look like you ever had any days off by your resume here.
We've definitely put in some work.
And on that note, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Leedz Edutainment Podcast. We have a very special guest today. Man that wears a lot of different hats: marketer, project manager, dispensary owner. Is it do you own a dispensary?
Cultivation. We own cultivation.
Sorry, cultivation, tour manager, consultant. Todd Dahn, now apparently AKA Todd Dahn, depending on how you want to pronounce that last name. Apparently, even his family pronounces it two ways.
Thank you for having me, man. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You know, we got the Still Gold show next week, and it was only my phone. Crap, 1 second, my phone's screwed up on me.
Yeah.
Well, that was a quick little jump, but we're back. So we got the show. We got the Still Gold show next Friday at Sonia. It's the Gold Leaf launch party as well that you are creating this brand strain under their band tied with their band.
Yeah. So one of the things that was important for me when I opened this company is the money that we make, we actually do some good shit with. There's too many companies in this space that are either run by people who really don't care or really don't have any ties to the community. So they're just here to scrape up as much as they can. So for me, I wanted to make sure that we were able to put things into the community through this company that helps not only my friends, right, because Still Gold have been friends of mine for a long time, but the community at large in which we can bring things forth to.
When you say this company that you started, this is Canna Live
Genetics. Yeah. So when the pandemic hit and touring stopped, because we had just came back from tour with Still Gold over in Europe, in the UK. I took Dutch a couple times. We were getting ready to do a big run with Still Gold for the last album over there, right when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So I just retired from music. I was like, I've had it. I need some days off. You know what I mean?
I think I do too.
Yeah. I was just like, this is the universe telling me to pivot. And I met some people who were involved in the cannabis industry and saw where the industry was at here versus other states. And I was already heavily involved in the legacy market, and we were developing custom genetics for that as it was. So it was simple to kind of turn those genetics into the legal market and then use them as a way to kind of help my friends and the community at large. So the funny thing is Still Gold had been smoking this strain for about 2 years while we were developing it before they even knew what was happening, or I knew we were going to give it to them. They just really enjoyed it. So it was really fun to be able to pivot that for them.
How does that work when you create a strain with a band? Like, what's the whole creative process behind that?
Well, for this one, I created it just because it was something that I was looking to put into the market, and then it just happened to align well with them. We blend about 4 to 5 different strains into the genetics that we have. We have a couple of staples that we breed in for stem strength and bud size and things. And then we bring in different pieces depending on the flavor profile and the terpenes and the tack that we're going after. This just happened to be something that randomly cures with this kind of gold color instead of an amber color that a lot of hash cures with. So the buds kind of had this gold sheen to it. So I would always tease them that this was like their strain even before all this happened, because it just kind of had this look that went along with the band. And then when we decided to do the grant program, it just made sense to launch with them, given that was the strain we're going to launch with, but also like the impact that we know we could have through them.
Right. What makes Still Gold's strain different than another strain?
Well, we've got a couple of different flavor profiles that are rather unique. I mean, there's a lot of citrus out there, but we're very orange heavy. We bring a lot of vanilla and skunk on the back end.
Skunk, Sorry, don't mean to cut you off on it. There's a lot of
Yeah,
technical
yeah.
terms. I'm gonna need a little clarification to break up in the middle. Skunk weed, when I was smoking weed 20 years ago, that was like the best weed you could get. What is the how do you get the skunk smell into weed? What is that?
We have a strain, so I don't tell anybody what strains we put into this. That's something that's
Ah,
part of the secret sauce that we do. So no,
okay.
no one can try to replicate it, right? But there's a
No one
specific
would, no one
strain.
would ever try to do that,
No,
right? No
no
one
one
would
would
ever.
ever try to steal this.
Oh.
There's a when you breed other strains together, you can take properties of them. So one of the things that we try to do is we have a very skunk heavy strain that we keep that we won't grow for the market because it just doesn't produce a lot of THC, but it produces a lot of specific terpenes that give you the skunk taste and flavor. So we breed that into what we're breeding if we want to give it a skunk flavor. We have a sour that we keep if we want to breed a sour into it. We have a diesel that we keep if we want to breed some cat piss into it. But that helps us create a more robust flavor profile than just putting something out that tastes like strawberries or apples or this or that. We want it to be complex, more like wine, right? Where when you take a sip of wine or you take a sip of something that's sat around and had a lot of pieces put to it, there's a flavor complexity to it. So we look to kind of bring some more mature products to the market that allow people to kind of grow with them.
So when you're cultivating, so you own a cultivation, what do they call it, plant or like a
Like a
warehouse?
cultivation facility, we have a small space inside a warehouse out in Holyoke.
Oh, nice. So and this is where you grow this stuff.
Yeah. We've got two small rooms with the lights and the air conditioning and the fans and all the crazy stuff that goes along with it.
Do you have
And
guards? Do you have guards with machine guns outside? Or?
we can't tell any of that.
Whoa, hello. That's the old school way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's what made you gonna get into this? I mean, obviously you probably have smoked weed, but like to take it to like is this technically horticulture? Is that technically what this is called?
It's technically we sit in agriculture. Like if this
Agriculture.
was a legal business, right, federally legal, we didn't have any of the issues. We would sit under cultivators would sit under agriculture because we
Okay.
grow. We're also a consumer packaged goods company because we package as well. So it's kind of cannabis companies are usually kind of multi-vertical because you're not very few companies just do one thing. So
Right.
we cultivate, we also package. We have the capacity to manufacture. We don't have facilities for that. So I don't know that we're ever going to make edibles or hash, which is what you would do through your manufacturing. But as a micro business, which is the license class that we have, the state gives you cultivation and manufacturing.
Huh. What made you want to get into this?
Um,
It sounds very technical and challenging and a lot to learn.
I've grown for a long time. For my own and then for the legacy market. So I was already kind of doing it. And from a marketing standpoint, selling weed and selling music is very similar. Especially if you take like back in the CD days. I mean, I did it for almost 30 years. So I've pre-internet, pre all those things. You know what I mean? Back in the days when we would put CDs on the shelf, if you were going to a record store and you look at the rap section, it's 30, 40, 50 CDs at that point because there weren't that, you didn't have home recording and all the other things that kind of changed the way the industry works. But when somebody looks at that, they see the same thing. They're just CDs. The experience and the nuance between them is on the consumption and the experience. So the way that we marketed musicians was always on the community and the experience that drove them to buy that CD. And cannabis is kind of the same thing. You have a dispensary, it's a bunch of weed on a shelf, the nuances and the experience of the consumption of that product. So I knew from a marketing standpoint, from where my expertise lied, that I could take a lot of the things that I did in music and kind of do them in cannabis as well. And then I learned later on, as I was getting into this, that from a neurological standpoint, the dopamine response that your brain gets from listening to music is very similar, especially like music you enjoy, you get emotional responses from, is really similar to the dopamine response you get from smoking weed. So from a scientific standpoint, I'm looking at the same identity seed, the same emotional triggers that I would pull for one to get into the other. So it was really easy to transfer my expertise from one to the other, which made it a lot easier to decide to get into this.
Geez, when you say it like that, it's kind of scary. Screwing my brain, brother. I smoked a lot of weed. I listened to a lot of music. Those are my two favorite things to do for a long time. I don't smoke weed anymore, but cannabis is. Do people even say smoke weed anymore? Is that even a thing anymore?
It's It shows your age a lot of times.
Oh man, I'm dating
I've been
myself.
told by people, yeah, I had to switch to cannabis too. We don't say marijuana anymore because of the origins of the use of the word. So that's definitely been thrown out. Weed is more of a casual
what's
thing.
the origin and usage of the word marijuana? What's that mean?
Well, it used to be called cannabis, and then back when the Stamp Act was passed in 1934, 36, whatever it was, part of the push in that was calling it marijuana because it was easier to associate with Hispanics and people of color because of the way the word sounded. So the word itself,
Wow.
switching it to that was based in racist dog whistling so that people could demonize it more. So
I barely ever called it marijuana anyway.
yeah, I mean, only your parents did, right? So it wasn't really hard to move off of that.
And the law. The
And
law called
right.
it. The law
Anybody
called it on me a few
for the
times.
marijuanas.
The law, yeah. With intent to distribute large amounts of marijuana.
Yeah, so we just try as an industry to just do better, right? Because there's a lot of ways that the industry fails. So there's little things that we can do better just to make the experience better for folks. And cannabis is technically the scientific term for it anyway. So as we try to normalize things, we just try to use verbiage that's correct.
Right. Well, I'm going to go back even before this. You talk about music. I always go back. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo. I got family up there. Well, my stepfather's family's from Buffalo.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nobody should ever be from
real
Buffalo.
Real rural
Yeah,
up there, man.
We're very, very blue collar up there. It was a steel town in the 60s and 50s.
Yep.
And when that crashed in the 70s, we became one of the poorest places in the country for a long time. And they're trying to rebuild it. I mean, the Peace Bridge is there, and that always kept things moving because when I was younger, that was the busiest thoroughfare in commerce moving into Canada. So there was a large mob presence and the other things in Buffalo, but none of the money stayed in Buffalo because they just drove through and kept right on going.
Right. Are you a Bills fan? Are you a diehard Bills fan?
No, I made money every Super Bowl they lost.
Yeah.
I don't.
I know Buffalo fans are pretty crazy.
Yeah, I don't believe in rooting for teams just because I live there. They weren't winners. So when I was growing up, and plus, like Bill's gear wasn't cool in the 80s and the 90s. Everybody wore Raiders. So I was a Raiders fan growing up. I was a Redskins fan growing up. I was a Larry Zonka fan. I mean, I grew up at a time when football was different, which is one of the reasons why I can't watch it anymore. Yeah. It's a gladiator sport. If you don't want to get hurt, go play golf, right? And if nobody wants to get hurt, football goes away, and I'm good with that. But you can't change the rules of physics just because you don't want to have a concussion. Like there's a million other things you can do with your life.
Right. Did you ever see the movie Buffalo 66 with Vincent Gallo?
No.
Oh, it's a pretty funny movie. He's from Buffalo and he places this bet on the Bills, like stupid bet, and like ends up going to jail and comes out. And it's this whole thing. It's a really good movie.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. But it's like a cult classic. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I went to Cali after that for a couple years. And I don't do earthquakes and wildfires. So I quickly left California. Snow is not that bad compared to having your fucking house burned down by a fire that you can't control. I'll shovel snow all day long. So I went to Chicago for 25 years and then came here.
Nice. What were you doing in Chicago?
That's why I did most of my music stuff. And then I did a bunch of other things. I opened some restaurants for some people and some bars and did some work helping some other companies. We built a sales department for the Illinois Bankers Association. We built a recruiting department for the company that owned AppTech, which they created Consumer GPS. So we just kind of dabbled in a bunch of things and just always stayed busy.
So you got this entrepreneurial spirit in you, obviously, because you seem like you just start these businesses, right? Like I'm talking about you, right? Like that's what you do. Like
yeah, I can't. I find it hard to work for other people because if I don't have respect for you, I find it very hard to take orders from someone. And it's easier for me to just work for myself. I found at a very young age. And I happen to be very good at pivoting and just finding ways to make what I do valuable for people. So I was able to do music, and when music would, because I never worked with famous people, I always had more fun working with independent artists and helping people start their brands and launch. So when things would slow down, I'd go do other things to just keep the bills paid. We helped some folks open restaurants, and I say me and the voices in my head, right? Like we open a couple of restaurants. Yo, they keep you company when it's cold outside.
Right.
So and it's always just looking to find other ways to just kind of keep honing, the irons that I have in the fire and make sure that I'm always looking for new ways to bring new things back to whatever it is that I'm doing. So when we would go out and open restaurants or whatever, I would always look for what I could do to bring back to the music, what I could do to help market this and that from learning all these other things.
A restaurant business, that's a tough business. That's just, that's a real tough business. I worked in a restaurant for, a long time in Middle East, obviously the Middle Eastern
Yeah, yeah.
restaurant. And the amount of work that the owners had to put in was excessive.
Yeah, nobody really understands what it takes to run a restaurant. They just come in and they want what they want, right? And that's why it's always so interesting when people come in and they're like, well, I don't want this and this and this. So just make me something off the menu and this and that. And they just really think that it's this casual thing to do, not understanding how disruptive it is and the way that everything works in the restaurant to cater to this one specific thing.
Right.
Because it's hard enough. You know what I mean? There's not a lot of money in it. People think people run restaurants and they're fantastically wealthy. And there are some people that do that, right? But a vast majority of people are just families, trying to eke out a living more so than creating some sort of generational wealth by serving hamburgers.
And a lot go down. A lot of restaurants fail.
Customers are fickle. Food prices change. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't imagine trying to run a restaurant through the pandemic with supply chain issues and pricing issues and then PPE loans and all these other things. So we're going to open a social consumption space in Somerville in the next year or two, which I have a restaurant attached to it. So we'll go back to doing that. But that's going to be about 50,000 square feet. We're going to do big Dave and Buster's style social consumption space, which will be fun. Which
the social consumption thing, I've talked to a few people about this, seems to be a spot place is kind of a fickle, challenging thing. There's not really, I remember isn't there technically one in Harvard Square right now?
So there's a couple underground ones. I won't mention their names because that's rude. But there's one in Harvard Square. There's one out in Worcester.
So it is technically underground?
Yeah, they're not legal because
okay.
there's no
right, well, that's good enough. Whoops,
there's no regulations for it. Yeah, there's no regulations for it whatsoever. We're basically waiting on the state to give us a carve out exception for the smoking ban, like cigar bars and hookah bars have, because you can't. Right now, the way the law is written, you can't combust indoors. So you can't smoke any flammable. You can't light up a joint. Can't smoke a bowl, any flower indoors. You have to smoke it outdoors. So they want you to build these giant patios where people can smoke. Well, we're in Somerville. Can I put 1,000 people on a patio smoking weed that isn't going to drive all the neighbors crazy? Like Massachusetts isn't built like California where they have outdoor smoking. So the only way it works is if we can smoke indoors, and they got to work out a couple of things to make that happen. And then in terms of, they gave it to cigar bars and hookah bars. We'll get it. Like I'm not really that worried about it.
Yeah,
there's too much. Actually. We're the largest tax base generating company or vertical in Massachusetts now, if I understand right. We've surpassed liquor. We're the number one crop.
There it is. And there it is.
We're the number one crop over cranberries now. So it's not something that they can just ignore and say that they don't have to give all the rest of the support services for.
Cranberries thing is so fascinating to me. I had no idea that most of the cranberries were grown in Cape Cod. I had no
I didn't
idea.
When I moved here, I was like, what do you mean cranberry bogs? Like the fuck? Like, and then they showed them and I was like, oh, I guess. And then they showed all the spiders and I was like, never.
Yeah. Ocean Spray owns all of it, I think.
Yeah. It's crazy. They flood them and yeah. I mean, you don't really know, right? Like how things are made. They just appear on your table and you're like, cranberry sauce. This is fantastic.
New England.
Yeah. So, I mean, but cannabis has gotten to a point now that they can't just push us to the corner. They can't treat us any other way that they want because we generate too much money. So we now have bargaining power to kind of argue with, to kind of make things move forward, which is a good change for the industry.
What about all these dispensaries opening up all over the place in Massachusetts? Do you think there's too many? Because some certain cities, like I go to Worcester, there's tons. You know what I mean? And they're popping up everywhere now.
I tend to look at it like this. Well, there's two things. One is different cities put them in different places. So like in Somerville, you can put one anywhere you want. They don't care as long as you're not next door to a school or a playground or anything, right? Like there's certain rules, but you can pretty much be in any neighborhood. In Holyoke, for example, you can only put them in the industrial zone. So there's like the 6-block radius where you can put them. So certain towns, it feels like they're a lot because they're all in 3 blocks. You know what I mean? So there might be 6 of them in 3 blocks. So when you hit that block, you're like, shit, there's a lot. But then there's nothing else in the rest of the town. In towns just like liquor stores and bars and restaurants and everything else, they're gonna just, the community will decide what they can and can't support. I feel like there's not enough due diligence in a lot of these companies when they open up their dispensaries as to what the neighborhood can support, which is why a lot of them fail, because people just think opening a dispensary is this easy thing and people just pop up and buy weed from you. And it's certainly not the case. Yeah, yeah, especially not, there's a lot of competition now and you can't really advertise and there's a lot of, your hands are tied in a lot of things. So the only thing you really can compete with is pricing, which is what's kind of created this race to the bottom in pricing for people,
Yeah.
which creates problems for people on my end because I can't afford to sell a $10 eighth. Where the fuck am I going to make any money in that?
I know the
You know what I
prices are
mean?
crazy.
Yeah.
This is
So
great.
that was one
So
of the things that was important to me when we hit the market is we had a product that demanded a price. I wasn't just growing some crap weed that we could just throw out because it's easy to grow crap weed. Like we put a lot of work and effort into making sure that we grow incredibly good craft product to make sure that we hit a market that consumers will be able to appreciate.
So you're saying that your weed gets you higher? Is that what we're saying there?
It's a funner experience.
How
We've
so?
made
I
sure,
mean,
well, because it's for me, and this isn't going to work for everybody, right? And that's why our product definitely isn't for everybody. For me, it's not about getting high. It's about the rest of the experience that cannabis brings to you. So like the gold leaf
eating,
strain
like
is
raiding the
yes, like
fridge.
gaining 6 pounds every day. So
Because I tell you, I did a lot of that.
we're heavy limonene and heavy mesanine terpenes. So we have a lot of anti-anxiety properties, a lot of energetic properties, a lot of mental focus properties, a lot of things that basically help artists and help me because I'm fucking crazy, right? So like for me, it helps quiet the voices and gives one the voice, right? And we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just something that's going to get you high, because it will get you high. Don't get me wrong, but it helps. It has pain relief properties. It has anti-inflammatory properties with the terpenes that we brought into it. There's definitely some sleep help with the mesanine in it. So we make sure that the products that we breed, because most people don't go to medical dispensaries for the medical needs anymore because adult use is the same thing in terms of flower. So why would I spend $250 on a card when I could just go here and buy it, right? So there's a lot of people that get their medicine from a recreational dispensary. So for me, it was important that we made sure that all the rest of the properties were there. So that's a lot of the things that bring the difference. And then in terms of the product in the marketplace, the grant that we give to which is $40,000 a year to kind of help them push their stuff forward, and the support through the house music events and all the other things that we'll talk about help people make the decision to pick us out of other things in the crowd.
Nice. We'll go back to the music. 20. You stated you had a studio first, right?
Yeah. So the first thing I did when I got into the music industry back in 1996, maybe,
Wow.
is I built. Yeah, and I was writing music before that, but this is when I started actually like trying to make money at it. I opened a recording studio early on uh, with the ability when SoundForge from Sony actually was out before Pro Tools was something that you could use at home.
Yep.
And I taught myself engineering, just sitting there playing with my own music, and then just started recording kids. Because at that time, home recording had just really started, so I didn't have a lot of competition. So it was very easy for me to have my friends and people that we knew from the area and stuff come down and just start working on music.
Right. So from there, what do you start? What is it? Platforms? Is that the label? What was that
Knowledge Giving Birth was the first production company, and that was the studio. And then we ran a kind of a boot camp for kids that were just getting into the industry. So we taught them how to rap on a microphone, right? How to be in the studio, how to hear your voice back and understand you're going to sound different. We wouldn't let them get on stage until they could jog a mile and rap their song, because you're not gonna represent me and run out of breath on stage. And until you're on stage, you don't realize what an aerobic exercise it is to stand on stage and rap for a half an hour.
Yeah.
So if you couldn't run a mile and rap, you didn't have the lungs, regardless of your physical shape, you didn't have the lungs to be able to do what we were setting people up to do. So I ran that for a while and had a lot of people run their kids through me, or kids, I say people, through me as their careers were starting, just so that they could understand the work ethic that it took. And then from there it grew. I produced more people. I started putting out my own projects just because I had access to a lot of people and a lot of music sitting around. And just started growing from there.
Yeah. You talk about one of your things was back in the day was trying to market the product on the shelf, right? You've mentioned this a few times. Talk about the mentality behind that, because that's the thing that's kind of forgotten now. But when I went to school, that was big too. Like they were teaching you the importance of that.
Well, the marketing was different because we didn't have the internet, right?
Right.
So it costs a shit ton of money to do it
Right.
because you had to physically buy a product, right? You had to buy CDs. There's no streaming or anything. So you had to buy, we did a lot of work in Japan. So I'll use Japan for example. Launching a record in Japan back then cost about 200 grand, 150 grand maybe. Because you had to buy 10,000 CDs to ship over there because you had to get them in all the stores, right? You had to hire a street team over there because you're not physically there. There's no internet. You can't just pop on Facebook and, tell people. And then you had to fly over there multiple times to do promotional runs in stores, all of this, right? It wasn't, again, you couldn't just get on a Zoom and meet with a guy from a record store. You had to physically go there. So to be able to market things, you had to physically be in those spaces. You had to go out on the road. You had to invest in yourself. You had to run promotional tours. You had to do all these things that made people aware of you because it was the only way. So we would go out on the road and, we'd spend, 10, 15, 20 grand running shows throughout different markets because you had to get out in the market to build your fan base there. And then buying on the opening acts for tours and all the things that labels would do that, you don't really hear about, right? But like you look at any label act that launches, any opening act that they get on a tour, the label bought that. It's just the way the industry works. So
who are you going out with? What artists were you working with at that point that were going over there overseas?
We weren't going overseas at that point. I didn't start going
Okay.
overseas till much later. We were just doing runs throughout the Midwest, and we would just tag along with other artists that were local that were actually doing shows. So we just started on that end because it was easy to tell somebody, all right, you're going to do 6 shows through the Midwest. We'll give you $500 to come along and do a 10-minute, 15-minute set in every city. Right. Because it's an investment, right? Like people all complain about pay to pay and this and that, but the music industry costs a shit ton of money. It's an industry. It's not a hobby. So nobody has a responsibility to make an artist's career happen other than the artist. It's not a promoter's job to put people in the room for you. It's your job to put people in the fucking room. And people have really gotten it confused back from what it used to be to what it is now, because there was no way to open for Mobb Deep in Chicago when they came if you didn't buy a fucking slot. Because they don't need you. They don't need an opener at all. They can just go and perform. You don't bring anything to the table, so why would you get paid? Right. And people forget that. And that's really one of the reasons I also pivot out of music is I understand the value of streaming. I'm tired of arguing the value of streaming and arguing the value of the way things are nowadays, because it could go back to the way it was before, and 90% of these people can't afford to do that.
Right.
So I look at it that way. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, you say in your you have an expertise in data analytics and streaming and social media. Explain more of that for me. I'd like to hear.
So one of the things that we did as streaming came about, and I started really getting interested in it, is we started learning that streaming gives you all the information that record labels used to hold dear. Right. Like you could only get sales reports through SoundScan, and SoundScan was like 100 grand. And it was incredibly expensive to belong to SoundScan because they only wanted certain people to have that information. Record labels would run your fan club for you because that gave them all the information. They don't want artists doing that shit. No, you just go and tour and do this. We'll take up all this for you, because everything runs on data. Even back then, Pepsi, Dyke, everything runs on consumption data. So the music industry is no different. So when we decided to really get into helping people around probably 2010 or so, streaming really started to hit, and we started looking at making our own company, and SoundCloud was here and some other things were happening. And I started looking at the back-end tools, and we could see, oh, wow, you can actually see that you had 2,000 streams in San Diego. You had 500 streams here. And obviously we'd filter out like Yugoslavia and places where, the farms are at. And you look at the domestic consumption, and we were able to start routing tours and routing appearances based on that consumption, because we know if we had 2,000 streams in a month in that city, there's somebody there that would want to see us. So we're not going to put a 500 room up, but we'll go get a 50 cap, 100 cap room and see what we can do. So we started really utilizing that, and then seeing how if we looked at social media and we looked at how people responded to things, we could really look and determine what they would be able to do. So we would go look at artist pages that were similar to the artists that we were looking at and go through all the comments and find people that said complimentary things about the artist. And then we market ourselves to them. Because if they like that artist, they're probably going to like this artist because they're similar in these certain ways. So we would look at the ways that people interacted with each other long before Cambridge Analytica and these others. And I'm far from the first, right? Ryan Leslie and other people were doing this before me. But if you're not going to have the label system, you have to build a label system for yourself because the label system is still needed. You still need all the support. You just have to find it out for yourself. So the easier way to do that is to comb social media and comb really finite pieces of interaction to then look for other people to talk to.
Wow. You tour manage too.
Yes. We took Still Gold on the road. I took John Glass. I got Token his first concert in Canada a long time ago. We've took a bunch of kids on the road. It's been fun.
And you've also started some nonprofits, right?
Right before the pandemic hit, I started a nonprofit called Analyze that was going to take kids from underserved communities here in Boston on tour in the UK for a week. And we had just started fundraising January of 2020, and then the pandemic hit. And I still don't feel comfortable going out for long runs the way things are anymore. Not necessarily from a health standpoint, that's definitely part of it, but from an economic standpoint, it's just different now. And until I can get my finger back on what makes it work again, it's not something that we're investing a lot of money into.
You talk about nonprofits. You had always talked about like Massachusetts. It's easier to get grants than Chicago. I remember you saying that to me. Talk to me about the benefits of Massachusetts in this regards.
Well, the state of Illinois doesn't have a budget to give to artists, so we can start with that, right? Like the state of Massachusetts gives. There's no Illinois Cultural Council. You know what I mean? There's none of that in Illinois. So we can already just start with that framework. But there's no equivalent to the Boston Foundation. There's no equivalent to any of these things that we have here. So you look at the lab grants, you look at all the things that are available here. I mean, there's probably close to $100 million, if not more, in grants that go out every year here to various stages of folks. So, I mean, it's crazy the amount of, and I might be exaggerating a little bit, but it's a lot of money that goes out, right? So the support that you have here is way different than in a lot of other markets. And obviously that support only goes to certain messages that come out in the music, right? So it's limiting it in that way. But if you understand the framework in which it sits, which is, trying to help people and let's not make a bunch of misogynistic music and all these other things, then it's a great space to sit in as an artist because you get a lot of support that goes along with it.
Be conscious. People say conscious rap is dead. You be conscious, you might get some grants.
Well, here's the thing too, right? Like there's a difference between dead and self-sustaining, right? Like conscious rap is never going to be commercial because it was never commercial in the 90s. You just saw Poor Righteous Teachers on fucking MTV once every 3 hours, right? That doesn't make commercial music conscious. So, but we're at a point in time where you can build a sustainable revenue as a conscious artist, grants or not. And by sustainable, I mean, you can make 50, 100 grand a year and have a real career, you know what I mean? And do something for yourself and create things for your family and then kind of grow from there. I mean, you look at Odyssey, you look at lots of people that have taken time to find their community and work with their community instead of being angry that other communities don't support them. They carved out a really good niche for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important. Like nowadays, it seems like with streaming and social media, people are it's easier for people to do that than it was when there wasn't that. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. Right. The only way you could find your community was to go out and ask them to come to you, right? You go out and do shows and hand out flyers and free CDs or tapes at a certain point in time, right?
Yeah.
And hope somebody listened to it and found identity and would come back. Now you have so many tools at your disposal. We could start with Linktree and go all the way down, right? Like there was no way in 1996 that I could give somebody a link that had every piece of content that I wanted to promote at that moment.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't even content. You just made records, and that was it. It was easier to be an artist, right? Because the label did do a lot of work for you. And you weren't focused on, like, I need 10 pieces of content a day and all this other shit that goes along with social media. But they're also not constrained to social media anymore. I was putting people on Discord and Twitch like 3 years before the pandemic. So most of my clients did really well over the pandemic because we had already set up direct to consumer channels for them. So they were able
Right.
to do live streams and do engagements through Discord and all these other things while everybody else was kind of panicking and trying to figure out how to keep going.
So after COVID, are you strictly just in cannabis now?
I still do some music things. We have Come to Pass, which is the play that we're producing. We're writing 35, 36 new songs for.
Yeah.
So we'll go from the 17 song version that we initially did to about 46, 47 songs. It'll run for about 2 hours, 15 minutes, give or take. So we're working on songs for that now. We're going to do a new version of it this year and then another new version next year. And then 2026 will be like the final costumes and everything that comes out. And then I still help, like I help Brandy. Brandy and I have a makeup company called Fire that we did a soft launch with last year. And we're going to do some more work this year that helps support her and creates vibrant colors for women of color to help work with that because there's not a lot of well-toned makeup for women of different skin complexions. And then, I work with Still Gold still, we're trying to find ways to get them into different spaces. But from a day-to-day standpoint, I don't generate my revenue from music anymore. Anything that I do is just helping people at this point, or we do through the cannabis company with the grants and the music events and things like that.
How much work? What's your work day look like at this point? How many hours?
I'm up at 6 to take the dog out.
Nice.
And then depending on the day, I'm home anytime between 4 and 7. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but like everything
No, I
isn't
mean
a
it
nine to
actually
five
sounds
job.
pretty good. Sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, like every
I'm home at
piece of this.
midnight. I'm home at midnight.
No, I'm in bed by 10 o'clock every day. That
Not
was one of
me.
the things coming out of this that was very important to me is that my work-life balance was much, much better. I am 52 years old and I can't keep doing what I did to myself before. My body won't take it anymore.
So let me talk to me about you and your peak work mode or overdoing it. What was your craziest work schedule?
Um, in Chicago before I left, when I was working with everybody here and doing tours overseas, my day would start at about 4 o'clock in the morning so that I could talk to people in Europe and then would run till about 10 or midnight. I was running between 4 and 6 hours of sleep. And I don't drink
Damn.
coffee. I
Why?
don't, it makes me jittery. I can't drink, I barely can consume Pepsi anymore.
So caffeine,
So
you have a caffeine sensitivity?
I have a super fast metabolism. I was a swimmer.
Ah.
I was a champion swimmer as a kid, and that just kind
Oh,
of stuck with
nice.
me. So
That's interesting.
my body is just like, yeah, no, we can't do that. So if I drink a cup of coffee, I start sweating. I start shaking. Like it's just, I talk enough.
What stroke did you do?
I swim individual medley, so I could swim all strokes. I held city records in the individual medley and breaststroke and freestyle and relay and stroke relay and freestyle relay and backstroke and butterfly.
Butterfly, man, that's the brutal one. I did swim team when I was young, and
Oh,
I was
nice.
tall. I was tall. I was good. I could do freestyle real good. I didn't stick with it. I should have. I'm mad at myself for not doing it because I couldn't dive. I was young, too young. I couldn't dive well, so I was embarrassed about my diving at that point because I just couldn't get it down. But I was good because I grew up swimming on a lake, so I was always
Oh,
swimming.
yeah, yeah.
And I
I
was
swim.
tall, so your arms were quicker.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing. I'm not that tall, so like I got out of it right before they really started looking at tall people. But I swam competitively through most of grammar school and all of high school. I had probably 30 scholarships to go swim at
Good
places,
for
and I
you.
just didn't go to college. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a good sport, man. It's a great activity.
yeah, it definitely. I mean, shit, talk about long days. So during swim season, we would swim a mile before school in jeans and sweatshirts, holding full pop cans to give us the most drag humanly possible. And then we
Damn.
would practice for 2 hours after school. But I mean, I was 16, so like, what did I know, right?
They make you swim
Um,
in clothes?
yeah, because it builds endurance. Because the
That's
jeans, when
crazy.
they get wet, and the sweatshirts, when they get wet, they create drag and weight, and it creates strength and endurance.
That is an interesting fact about you, Todd. I would not have known that one.
So yeah, but my days used to be crazy. And that's why the things I do now are like, other than the weed thing, like everything's kind of part-time. We work on the play 1 day a week. I might write music here or there, but like everything's really compartmentalized so that it doesn't overwhelm me in a sense that I'm either too many plates spinning and they're crashing, right? Or like I don't have any time for anything because all I'm doing is spinning.
Yeah, it can get crazy, you know, when you take on too many projects.
And I like to do things and I like to help people. So it's really hard for me to say no when somebody comes to me and says that they need something. So I just try to compartmentalize it as much as possible. And I say no now, which is really nice too.
So that was
It's
your
probably my
problem.
favorite word.
You used to never say no.
Yeah, I wouldn't, because honestly, like I looked at it all as experience, right? Like the only way I'm going to learn is to do some shit.
Right.
So, and the way that my neurospiciness is set up, like if I don't understand it fully, like I can't do it. So that's why I know about dopamine and marketing and all these other things, because I need to really understand why this shit works. That's why when I got into social media analytics, I got into it as deep as I did, because that's the only way to make it work for me. And then that brings value because I actually understand. I'm not just saying these things happen. I can tell you why they happen, and we can work on ways to make that why more feasible for my client.
Any tips you can just give to any artists out there?
Go get a job.
No, I'm not going to deny that one. And I always talk about that too. The job to help support the music career is very important these days. And all in music is not necessarily a good life.
No, it's a hard life. And all jokes
Right.
aside, just have realistic goals and understand that a $50,000 a year music career is respectable. Don't let these people
Absolutely.
think that if you're not making $1 million and you don't have a million streams, you have this and that you don't have a career, because $50,000 a year is more than 90% of people making music makes.
That's what I was about to say. If you're making $50,000 a year in music, that's like 500 grand in the real, in the
Yeah, like
real
you're
world. You
you're
know,
doing
like,
really,
it's
really
like,
well.
woo,
There's
there
a
we
small group of
go.
people that can do it,
There we
because
go.
nobody understands and wants to do the little bit of work that it takes to launch it. Because people get into music thinking, oh, I rap, so does everybody else. Like it's not special.
Yeah,
And
the
that would be my
novelty's
other thing,
gone.
right? Like if you really want to do this, find something else, find another skill set that you can bring to the table that adds value. Nobody cares that you rap. Do you paint? Do you sing? Do you run with your dog on fucking skateboards? Like something else that people can find identity in, because nobody, rapping isn't special, singing isn't special anymore.
That's sad.
It isn't, it isn't. I mean, when you think about it, back when we were younger, only about 1% of people who had talent in the world made money off of it. And there was really no other path for it. So at least now there's a path for it, right?
Good point.
It used to annoy me that so many people who I felt weren't talented were in the space, but that was just my ego getting in the way of my humility to understand that everybody's talent isn't for me. And it's not my space to tell somebody that they shouldn't try.
Right.
Whether they're successful or not isn't up to me. But especially in hip hop, we have this really weird thing where it's like, if you're not fucking Illmatic, you're not rap. And it's like, bro, Illmatic isn't Illmatic anymore. Like it's cool, but you go back and listen to it, and that production's really dated. It changed the rap game at that point, but you listen to it now, and it's not the same. He says some shit in there that's really problematic. I mean, there's a lot of things in it that don't age well, right? So we can't just gatekeep and think that everything's going to go back to the '90s, because the '90s aren't as good as we remember.
I remember hearing Illmatic for the first time when I first heard it back then, and it was like I remember thinking, I don't know how anybody could rap better.
Oh yeah,
You
and then
know,
his
that's
career
how
went to
good it
shit after
was.
that.
It was like, bro, like I was like, how could anybody be better than this, rap better than this? I don't know how that could be done, you know. I don't think I still have heard it really that much, but
There's a couple. The Fugees' debut album sits up there with me that way.
great
Um,
production. Yeah, that's a good
the
one.
Wu-Tang album sits up there with me that way, the
Yeah.
first one.
Oh,
But there's only a few. And for me, it's the emotional part, right? Like the emotion that I got when Illmatic dropped, because it was so crazy. Nas was so good, and it was so well produced, and everything just meshed, that as a kid, or I think it was 17, 18 at the time, maybe whatever, like that emotion hit me hard. You know what I mean? So like, that's always going to sit with me. But when I look at the rest of his career, and this, I use Nas as a great example. Like, he had a great first album, and then to me, it's been kind of shit other than singles off the albums for like 20 years. I know I'm kind of alone in that feeling, but that's why I have to remind myself that art is subjective, because I don't like a lot of shit that a lot of other people do. I like a lot of weird shit nobody else does. It's just kind of the way it goes.
No, you're right. It is subjective, and we're all, for a while there, hip hop was kind of one thing. You know what I mean? It's not that no more. It's many different avenues and many different, and music has just always done that. It's free form. But I know you. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I was a picket holder for a while of, boom bap or nothing. And
if
I'm being honest, like, Still Gold really helped me move past that. The Torch Song album showed me that we could take what we used to have and what we have now and make something that makes sense.
Because people, don't want to hear the same. Well, you want to hear something different. You want to hear an alternative version, something new. So it's healthy.
Yeah.
Well, I know you got to get out of here. I appreciate your time. Let's say the show. I will see you. When this thing drops, it will be on the 12th of April. The Still Gold Leaf launch party with Tori and the Blade Runners. It's gonna be a good night.
Yeah. I appreciate you so much, man. Everybody come out. We're gonna have a good time. We got a couple of contests for people that go by that. We got Gold Leaf right next door at Yamba, so we're gonna do some nice contests for people that'll buy it at the show, and we'll make it fun.
All right. So I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into the Leedz Edutainment Podcast. A very special guest, Todd Dahn or Dan. He goes either way. So
thank you so much, man.
We'll talk soon. Later.